So thank you for being here today at the More About MS program on managing invisible symptoms. This program is brought to you by Can Do Multiple Sclerosis. Can Do MS is a pioneer in helping people and families with MS create a life in which they can thrive. We offer free programs and resources that provide you and your loved ones with solutions to manage your MS, motivation to help you make real change, and support from people who really get it. I would like to welcome everybody that's here in person, as well as everyone here virtually. Thank you for being here. In your folders that you were given on your way in, you'll find a few important things. So there's a fact sheet that provides more information about Can Do MS as an organization. There are also copies of all of today's presentation slides. There are resources on the invisible symptoms we're going to be talking about today, as well as a handout for the workshops we'll be breaking into at the end of the day for our in-person attendees. And importantly, there's a survey in there for our in-person attendees that we're going to have you fill out before leaving today. We want to take a minute and really thank our sponsors, Biogen, Bristol-Myers Squibb, Sandoz, and Viatris, and thank you to all of our wonderful exhibitors who, again, they're on the perimeter of the room. If you didn't have a chance to stop by and say hi during lunch, you'll have an opportunity to do so during the break, so please do. So again, my name is Stephanie Buxovidin. I live with MS. I was diagnosed about 10 years ago. I'm also a nurse practitioner and an MS researcher, and it's a privilege to be here with all of you today. The rest of our healthcare team here with us includes Randy Shapiro. He's a neurologist and the chair of More About MS. We have Kathy Costello, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Can Do MS and a nurse practitioner. Roz Kalb, who's a Senior Programs Consultant at Can Do MS and a clinical psychologist. Mandy Rohrig, a Senior Programs Consultant at Can Do MS and a physical therapist. Megan Weigel, who's a nurse practitioner, and Stephanie Nolan, who's an occupational therapist. So this is our plan for today. So we are at the welcome. We're going to do a mindful moment. We're going to have a panel discussion about invisible symptoms and an opportunity for you all to ask questions of the panel. Then we're going to take a 30-minute break. And again, that's for you to mingle, stretch your legs, visit our exhibitors. Then we're going to come back together and do something called Make Use of a Moment, which is going to be really fun. And then our virtual attendees at that point are going to log off, and those of you who are here in person, we're going to move into an hour-long workshop, and you're going to pick which workshop is most interesting to you, and then we're going to have an opportunity to mix and mingle, where you're going to have a chance to talk to anybody, any of the presenters here, as well as each other. So it's going to be a great day. So with that, I would like to introduce Megan Weigel to start our day with a mindful moment.
Hi, everybody. I think you can hear me okay. My name's Megan. I'm a nurse practitioner, like Stephanie said. If you follow Can Do MS, I do the Mindful Moments podcast on Mondays. It's really an honor to be here with you today. And we're actually going to have more than just one mindful moment. We're going to have a little bit of time together here to relax and come into the room together. So if you're eating, if you wouldn't mind just putting your food down for the next few minutes together. I was charged with coming up for a mantra for today, and I figured it would come to me on the fly, and it sort of did. So what I want you guys to think about right now is what you came into the room with that you might need to let go of, that might be holding you back from what you can take away from this meeting. And it might be like, oh, I'm tired, or they're going to tell me things that I already know, or, it's a beautiful day, I'm coming here because someone made me do it. These things might be kind of negative, and what I'm trying to get at is I want to reframe anything negative here into a positive. So the mantra for today's program is I can let go of that. So whatever it is that you came into this room with that is going to hold you back from getting everything you need out of this program information, community, things to be armed and dangerous with to go home and help you live your best life, whatever that's holding you back from receiving that today, your mantra is, I can let go of that. What I'd like for you to do, if you're comfortable and you feel safe, is just close your eyes. And notice that it's quiet, and that's okay. Notice what your breath is doing, and notice how your heart is beating. And now take a deep breath in, a longer and a slower and a deeper breath than you would usually do, maybe to a count of 4 or 5. And then exhale to that same count. And keep that breath, that longer and slower and deeper breath, keep that going. And let it be easy. Don't try to take a deep breath and struggle. Just try to take a deep breath that's easy. And as you're taking these longer and slower deep breaths, put your attention on your forehead. Notice if your brow is furrowed. You can draw one hand or 2 hands up to the center of your brow and just draw them lightly across your forehead. Just let a little pressure or deeper pressure, whatever feels good to you, do that a couple of times. So your brow is unfurrowed. Let your ears relax. Let the inside of your mouth hollow out. Draw your shoulders up to your ears, and then roll them down your back. I can let go of that. Let your hands open up and relax. Let your legs relax in your seat. Maybe you put both feet on the ground. Feel the way you're supported from the ground up. I can let go of that. As you continue to breathe in and out a little more slowly and deeply than you're used to, think about that breath coming in through your heart center, like the literal center of your chest. If you have a hard time picturing how to do that, you can even put your hand on the center of your chest. I can let go of that. Whatever it is that shows up in your mind's eye right now as you're breathing slowly and deeply, as you're relaxing, yet still things show up to try to take you out of this moment, you can let go of those things. Just let them pass by. So continue that longer and slower and deeper breath. And call to mind an experience where you felt restored, renewed, loved, cared for, celebrated. Or maybe it was you giving love or care or celebrating someone else. Maybe it's your favorite place in the world, the place where you feel most calm and most at peace. Call to mind that experience, all of the details of that experience, and most importantly, how that experience feels in your body. If you're having a hard time doing that, you might think about when you've been gone from your home and you get back and you see a loved one or a pet. Maybe how you feel when you see the sunrise in the morning. Or maybe a loved one had something special happen and you felt very proud. Feel those positive, renewing, rejuvenating feelings in your body. The ones where your heart swells. Maybe you get goosebumps. And anchor those feelings with your breath. So here you are, breathing a little more slowly and deeply than you're used to, comfortably, feeling renewed, rejuvenated, loved, and cared for. So anything that you walked in here with that's going to hold you back from receiving everything that you can receive today, you can let go of that. Take a really deep breath in together. You can even make noise doing it, like. And then open your mouth and exhale. Ha. And before you gently let your eyes open, just right across your forehead in your mind's eye, I can let go of that. I can receive. I am worthy. I am capable. I am strong. I can do. When you feel comfortable, you can gently start to open your eyes, wiggle your fingers and your toes, and come back to the room. And then if we could really gently turn the lights back up, just really slowly. That would be great. Thank you. Has anyone in the room not done a meditation before? Any hands? Everyone's done a meditation before. That's amazing. Oh, do we have one that hasn't? So you just meditated for about 10 minutes. That's pretty cool. So I hope you guys have a great day today. I look forward to meeting with you later. And if you get stuck today with something or a negative thought comes into your head, just remember, I can let go of that. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to get ready to launch into our first panel presentation, but I wanted to kick it off by getting to know those of you in the room and online a little bit. So we're going to ask, which invisible symptom is most challenging for you? And just as one quick word on invisible symptoms, obviously those of us with MS who are using assistive devices, who have mobility challenges, that's pretty much the only MS symptom you can look at somebody and see. Everything else is below the surface. So what is it that's invisible to others that affects you the most living with MS? And I'd love if people would just raise their hands and shout out one word, a sentence, whatever you're comfortable sharing. What is it? Mood, absolutely. Cognition, absolutely. Fatigue, a huge one. Tingling, right, paresthesias. And with that, pain sometimes, right? Cognition, yes. So that's 2 for cognition, absolutely. So let's just a show of hands if you're comfortable. Who here? Yes? Pain, yeah. So who here has experienced pain with MS? Absolutely. Who has experienced fatigue, cognition, mood? All of these are very common. So we're going to bring our wonderful panel up here today, and they're going to talk to you a little bit about all of those things. I didn't even cue you. You all came up with that all on your own. So we're going to turn the meeting over to Raz Kalb and our wonderful panel. Thank you all for being so great.
Really thrilled to be up here with my beloved colleagues and friends. And just to remind you, Kathy Costello is a nurse practitioner by background. Mandy Rohrig is a physical therapist. Randy Shapiro is a neurologist and symptom management guru upon guru. And I'm a clinical psychologist. So we've got you covered, okay? So let's talk first about fatigue.
It's up to me to talk about fatigue to start with. And you see the slide up there and you have it in your handout. And fatigue is the single most common and the single most disabling symptom that we see in multiple sclerosis. Single most common and single most disabling symptom. So it's no wonder when we asked, how many of you have fatigue? All their hands kind of went up in the air. And so I get asked about fatigue all the time. You can read the slide here. I just want to talk a little bit about it around the slide. When I get asked about fatigue, even by people who don't have MS, I always would say to them, there are different kinds of fatigue. So in order to treat the fatigue and understand it, we have to know what kind of fatigue you have. And there are really 5 different broad categories of fatigue. You can have normal fatigue. You work hard, you get tired. You can understand that. And so we treat that by taking rest periods and realizing that we may have to cut down because of the hardness of our work. You can have short-circuiting fatigue. Boy, you sure could have it in this hotel, couldn't you? You start out walking from the gate, and you're walking pretty good from the door, and as you go, it's harder and harder to walk, and you get more. You can see that demyelinated nerve conducting, and then it blocks. It blocks. And that's a specific kind of fatigue. So when we see that kind of fatigue, we treat that with a drug like Ampera, which is sitting back there, a potassium channel blocker that allows demyelinated nerves to conduct better, and we can treat that by rest. We see the fatigue that occurs with deconditioning. If you're not in shape, if you're not doing exercise, and then you go do something and you get fatigued, you can understand that kind of fatigue. We see the fatigue that occurs with depression. If you're not sleeping well, not eating well, not feeling well, it's easy to get fatigued, and understand that we have to treat that. You're going to hear more about that management later. But then we see the most common kind of fatigue. We call it lassitude, or MS fatigue it's been called. It's seen in some other autoimmune types of diseases. It's an overwhelming tiredness that hits you for no particular reason. You just get tired and you feel like you could nap. It must be neurochemical in its etiology, because we can use certain neurochemicals to kind of treat that. So we have that kind of fatigue. And then we add to it the fatigue that occurs when people are sleeping at night and they may have a little sleep apnea, so they don't sleep as well. Or they may have spasms at night and that wakes them up. Or their bladder may wake them up. Or the medicines they take for spasticity may make them more fatigued. Or the medicine they take for depression may make them more fatigued. And so we see those kinds of fatigues. And so there's lots of different fatigues. And there's cognitive fatigue, where we get that brain fog that comes over us that is difficult to deal with, a form of lassitude of the brain. So fatigue is the single most common and the single most disabling symptom that we see in MS. And in order to treat it properly, we have to know what kind of fatigue and develop a management plan based on that.
Thanks, Randy. And before we ask Mandy to talk about other management strategies for fatigue, I just want to call out what was on the bottom of that slide, which is that support partners get fatigued too. It's unique in some ways to them. It can feel like exhaustion. It can feel like somebody's pulled the plug on the drain, just like a person with MS can feel that way, but for different reasons, obviously. But we need to be aware that everybody living with MS is affected and can experience draining, exhausting fatigue for lots of different reasons. So Mandy, can you tell us something about how to manage fatigue in ways that may not seem obvious?
Yes, I would be glad to talk a little bit about what you can do to help you manage your fatigue. And I think it goes without saying, because you see a group of us up here, that fatigue is often managed most optimally with a team. So as we go through these different potential strategies that you can consider to help manage your fatigue, remember that you have a team of people that can help you implement these different strategies. So first, how to manage that MS fatigue. Exercise. Exercise and physical activity, it may seem counterintuitive, but building up your strength, building up your stamina, building up your overall condition and health can help you manage your fatigue. We talk a lot about the 4 Ps at Can Do MS, so if you've followed any of our learning materials, you may have heard this before. Planning, positioning, prioritizing, and pacing. Those 4 Ps are ways that you can organize and look at your day to help you manage your fatigue. So for example, if you have a task list of activities that need to be done, how can you organize that task list for your day that allows you to pace them out? How can you prioritize them? How can you pace them out and allow yourself to build in rest time so that it's not overly fatiguing? I do want to comment too, sometimes fatigue can bleed into the next day, right? It builds from one day to the next. So using those 4 Ps and trying to look at your week often as a whole can also help you manage that cumulative fatigue, or what I like to call exercise hangover, honestly. Feels like that. Moving on, mobility aids and other adaptive devices. So those are tools, and we really want you to think of them as tools that you can use to help you conserve your fatigue and conserve your energy rather, and to also allow you to move more safely. So selecting the right mobility aids, selecting the right tools within your home, within your workplace can help you to conserve fatigue, conserve your energy. Cooling devices. Do we have a cooling device group here? I don't think in our exhibit hall. Cooling products can be incredibly helpful, and I would encourage, with respect to exercise, I would encourage you to think about cooling even if you don't feel overheated. We know that as little as 1/10 of a degree decrease in your core body temperature can have an impact on how you feel and how you move. So thinking about how to use those cooling devices regularly throughout your day, before exercise, during exercise, after exercise, or during any other exhausting activities you might anticipate. And of course, medications can be very helpful, which is the situation where we would make sure that you get in contact with a nurse practitioner or a prescribing healthcare provider who can help guide you on the best medication. Cognitive fatigue, as Randy alluded to in those opening remarks, is that brain fog. It's that inability to think clearly and process your thoughts clearly. And really, we lean on our speech-language pathologist team members to help that. We lean on our psychologists to help with those cognitive rehabilitation strategies as well. Adequate sleep, as well as addressing mood issues, can help with that cognitive fatigue. And lastly, I think it's important to recognize that there can be many, many other symptoms that can contribute to fatigue. Sleep deprivation, pain, bladder issues, spasms at night, more specifically sleep disturbances such as sleep apnea or insomnia. So really working with your team and really breaking down your challenges that you have and really starting to do a little detective work about what the sources of your fatigue might be can be helpful, and use your team to do that.
Before we move on to pain, I just want to comment that how well you describe what your experience of your fatigue is to your healthcare provider, the better that provider is going to be able to help you. And that's going to be true for for every single one of the invisible symptoms we talk about, because they can't read your mind either, even though they're healthcare professionals. So think about, before you go in, how it feels, when it happens, how you can best describe it.
Let me underline that. That's really important, because your provider may not see this the same way we're talking about it. And you go in and say, I have fatigue. They're not going to know which way to go. You need to really explain what kind of fatigue you have.
Awesome. Kathy, can you talk to us about pain?
I sure can. In fact, I have pain right now. Can I talk about that?
You should see a neurologist.
Hey, there's an idea, and maybe a physical therapist. Anyway, in multiple sclerosis, pain comes in a variety of forms. And how many people, again, raise your hand, who have experienced or are experiencing pain? So it's terrible. It's terrible. Almost 80% of people with MS will have pain at one time or another, and some people have it all the time. How many people notice that when they have pain, it's worse at night? Right? When all that other stimuli that can distract you goes away, and you're left with all that ability to focus on that terrible pain. So generally, we think about pain in MS as coming in from two different sources, right? And one of them is musculoskeletal, so muscle pain. And that can be from a variety of things. And I'm going to stand up now, and I'm going to do this and hope that Mandy agrees with me, because she is the physical therapist. But sometimes when you have a weakness in your leg, you have to compensate for that because you don't want to trip, right? So you start to swing the leg around to make sure you don't trip. Well, that's not normally how we walk, right? And so that can give you a really pretty significant pain in your back, right? And we see that a lot. The other thing people do to avoid tripping is they lift their hip up. So now they're hiking that hip. Same thing, you're throwing your body off a little bit, and that's going to create some asymmetry, but also some discomfort. Sometimes the way we sit, right? Everybody here is sitting very nicely, but some people who spend a lot of time seated, they're in a wheeled mobility device, sometimes the posture in those devices isn't optimal, and that can cause a lot of pain. It can cause pain in the shoulders, the trunk, the hips, the legs, and if you sit all day and you go to get up, you may be like this, because now those muscles have tightened up, and it takes a minute. I find this every year of my life now, that if I've been seated for a long time, it takes me a little bit longer. Compound that with the spasticity that occurs in MS. So seating is really important to be optimal to relieve some of that musculoskeletal pain that can occur. So we've talked about, muscle stress and strain. So we all have that. I did that by carrying a backpack on one arm. I somehow thought that was a good idea for the last 3 days. And it hasn't gone very well, as it turns out. But when we have a lot of spasticity, it pulls on the joints. Spasticity is often felt in the muscles that hold us upright, right? We need a certain amount of tone to keep us upright, or we'd all be Jabba the Hutt. We'd be like a blob. So sometimes in MS, you get too much tone, and that can hurt. It can really pull on your joints, and you'll get achiness in those joints, right? And you might think you've developed arthritis. Maybe you have, but it may also be that spasticity that's causing pain. Spasticity can also provoke spasms, which can be very painful as well. So that sudden tightening of a muscle group, that can be remarkably painful. There are certain types of spasms that people can have periodically throughout the day that responds very well to medication, but can also be very painful. How people use mobility aids. You know, sometimes we feel that it's intuitive that if my right leg is weak, perhaps I should hold the cane on my right side to hold my leg up. But actually, the opposite would be true. And if you keep it on the side that's weak, you're going to walk like this. And ultimately, that's going to give you a backache, right? So holding it to normalize your gait is really what we're after. How am I doing so far?
You're doing good. I would just add with the mobility aids, if they're too high, then you end up wearing your shoulders as earrings, and you can get a lot of neck pain, a lot of discomfort. Conversely, if it's too low, then you're hunched forward, and it leans into what Kathy was talking about earlier. She's doing great, though.
Thanks so much. I've learned well. So, and also people that use a rollator device, same kind of thing. There's a tendency to put our butts out and walk like this. As it turns out, when there's weakness, That's an easy way to hold yourself up, but it can cause a lot of discomfort. And when we're able to normalize that and stand up and look ahead, we tend to relieve some of that musculoskeletal pain. When we look at neuropathic pain, it's a completely different mechanism, right? So now this is coming from the central nervous system. Okay, this is coming directly from damage from MS, and it's a terrible pain. This is often pain that's terrible at night. Burning, searing, throbbing pain, and it can be anywhere. Some people feel it in a limb, in the trunk, in the head, in the face. It can be very electrical in how it presents. Some people who have facial pain, it's called trigeminal neuralgia, but even a little breeze coming across the face can trigger that pain. So it's remarkably painful and relentless for people. And it really wears on you. It wears on other things like your mood, like your ability to participate in a conversation, your ability to concentrate on anything, because it's kind of hard to get away from the pain that you're experiencing. Many of the neuropathic pain syndromes that we see can be managed very well by certain types of medicine, but not the medicine that you take for a headache generally, and not the medicine that you take when you have an achy joint, and not Aunt Jenna's Percocet that was taken after her bunion surgery. As it turns out, opioids, the Percocets, the Tylenol with codeine, they don't work for this kind of pain at all. Okay, they may dull you and dull your head a little bit, but they really don't take the pain away.
So let's turn up the next slide.
Okay.
We're going to talk about the management of that.
All righty.
So Mandy, can you talk first and add about the managing the musculoskeletal pain, and then we'll come back and talk about managing neuropathic.
Yeah, you bet. So Kathy, you did a great job of starting to kind of give some examples to illustrate how exercise can counteract some of those postural changes that happen as a result of moving a certain way or sitting a certain way or trending towards different postural patterns. So exercises, with the help of a PT and your rehab team, you can identify different stretching exercises. So in the case where Kathy was talking about someone who uses a mobility aid and is leaning forward a lot, stretching those muscles on the front of the leg, stretching the quadriceps and the hip flexor muscles, as well as strengthening those buttock muscles and the muscles of the back can really help with that. Range of motion exercises can be really helpful with pain also. If you have neck pain, working on different stretches to help alleviate that can be helpful, as well as core strengthening. So what I would just encourage you to do is, if you have pain, do a little detective work with your healthcare team to figure out the origin of that pain. And I should add, it's not always related to MS. It could be related to something else. So make sure that you don't just automatically assume all the time that it's just simply MS related. Gait and postural training, mobility aids we've spoke about a little bit. There are other options that you can consider to help you manage your pain, and some of those are massage therapy, acupuncture, dry needling. Some of those types of tools and resources can be really helpful for people. Electrical stimulation, and by this we mean like your TENS unit, T-E-N-S, or your IFC units, which are two types of electrical current that, when the pads are strategically placed on different parts of your body, can help to lessen the pain in that particular area. So all of these tools are at your disposal to help you manage some of your musculoskeletal pain. And I do want to add one last thing before I pass it over to Randy, is that sometimes an approach might work well for a while, and you got to switch it up. So consistent reevaluation of that pain is really important to make sure that you are optimally managing it and using the strategies that are best for you at that time.
So before you talk about neuropathic pain, we have a lot of support partners in the room. And Mandy, could you talk about the pain that they can get, for example, from assisting somebody who's had a fall or walking with somebody who needs a lot of support?
Yeah.
While they're, can you, because they get musculoskeletal pain too and don't always talk about it.
Right. Well, number one, we want support partners to remember to take care of their own health also. And if your loved one with MS is using you beyond what you feel comfortable with and that is no longer safe, then we need to explore other options. That's the bottom line, right? But that said, support partners often help with transfers. They often help with stretches. So just having an awareness of your own posture, having perhaps your own side exercise program that you do alongside your loved one can be a way for you to stay aware of your own abilities and your own health along the way.
And Mandy, I have a question. With a support partner, if someone is going to physical therapy, for instance, they're in a physical therapy session, can the physical therapist also address with the care partner how best to help with transfers? If someone would happen to fall, help getting them up so that they're safe and it doesn't hurt them?
Yes, absolutely. A physical therapist can practice strategies to help you get on and off the floor safely and can instruct the support partner on those strategies to help get on and off the floor.
So I'm going to pick up on neuropathic pain, but before we do, I'll just make a comment that musculoskeletal pain is very common in people who have MS and people who don't have MS and people who are just ordinary citizens aging and exercising and doing everything else. And so the important thing from a physician standpoint is to make the proper diagnosis, to get the proper treatment. Typically when somebody comes into my office with a little bit of pain in the past, or whether they're not off to physical therapy or they're not off to wherever, we're off to a little bit of naproxen or a little bit of ibuprofen and see what happens, and usually calms down. But if it turns out it's degenerative arthritis on a chronic basis, it turns out it's a chronic pain, something that requires more than just a little bit of hand-holding, so to speak, then we have to utilize the appropriate professionals to get this pain under control. But it's very common. Primary care providers are the front line of this, typically, in most circumstances. Now, neuropathic pain is different because the primary care providers are not familiar with neuropathic pain. And the first comment I'd like to make is something that most people wouldn't make, but I guess I'll make it because I'm old and I've seen a lot.
He does that a lot.
And that's that when I see somebody with the burning, irritative, miserable type of pain that we see, my usual comment is that burning, miserable, terrible pain like that, that's awful to you, is not a bad prognostic indicator. You know, when we see people, sometimes we think, what's going to happen down the road? And if I could forecast that, I'd be a wealthy person instead of sitting here on this panel. But I can't. But sometimes I can. I know I don't know when somebody's going to do well, but I know when somebody sometimes is going to do poorly because they have certain bad prognostic indicators that I can see. And pain is not one of those. Even though it's primary there, you're right there, you're awful with it. I've seen people that have to deal with it, and if they can deal with it, they deal with it well over their lifetime. The other point I'd like to make is that burning, irritative pain is just a symptom on a continuum. Sometimes we see itching, sometimes we see burning, sometimes we see lancinating pain, sometimes we see it all in the same person, in the same limb, in the same thing on a continuum. And we've learned that part of the reason for this going on is that the nerve is short-circuiting, so we use short-circuiting medication that you wouldn't think of as pain medication. Same medicines we use for the epilepsies, for seizures. And we've learned that those will tone down the pain. Kathy brilliantly said, don't use opioids. I concur 100,000%. That just gets you into more trouble than not. When I was a young pup, pain management was handled very differently than the way it's evolved. Today, if you go into a pain clinic, you're likely to see an anesthesiologist, or you're likely to see a physiatrist. By the way, that's the way it's properly pronounced, physiatrist, not physiatrist, physiatrist. You're likely to see one of them. But in the old days, you saw a psychiatrist. And you can say, a psychiatrist? I don't have anything wrong with my mind, I have pain. And you're right. But the ones that specialized in pain control did it through other means, through exercise, through behavior things, and they were very successful, but it took time, and it was safe and sound, and it worked. There were all kinds of behavioral interventions, all kinds of cognitive behavioral treatments and therapies that people could use that worked and were safe and didn't have risks. You've been through the mindfulness and meditation, you know that can help you. Stress management can help you. So there are lots of ways to manage this type of pain, but the first thing is make the proper diagnosis, recognize where it fits in the continuum, get to the proper person who can direct the care to the proper people, and it really does, in chronic pain, take a team approach.
So one of the things that Kathy asked was how many people noticed that their pain was worse at night. And correctly saying that one of the reasons all of our aches and pains are worse at night is that we don't have the rest of life distracting us. We're just sitting there wallowing in how things hurt. And that's why the mindfulness and the behavioral interventions help, because they literally teach people how to deflect the focus from that sensation of pain to other places. It can't necessarily magically make these lancinating, stabbing, burning pains go away, but you can train your mind to deal with that sensation differently. So this is a big new change in the way we treat neuropathic.
You change what? Back to the old way of doing it.
Well, interestingly enough, though, a lot of people might be put off by that because it's believed, does somebody think this is all in my head? Well, Randy, as a neurologist, might say, well, as a matter of fact.
Everything's in your head.
But the point being, what Roz is saying, there's a purpose, and it may not be getting at the source of the pain, but your sensation of the pain can be altered, can be reduced through these interventions. And I think it's been remarkable, really, what we've seen through research on how effective some of these talk therapies really are for people.
Awesome.
And I could say I've seen it firsthand in the past, and somehow it got buried because we want the quick fix. But this is something that requires some time and effort.
Yeah. So mood has come up several times already as we have talked about different invisible symptoms, because our mood is with us all the time. Day and night, we're feeling our feelings and experiencing things that sometimes are pretty painful. So mood changes, we all live with them. With or without MS, we are dealing with mood changes. But I think it's really important to know that there are mood changes that are very, very common in people with MS, and not for the reasons that everybody assumed. Yes, it is a difficult, challenging, anxiety-provoking, unpredictable illness. And that is responsible for some of the worries and cares and concerns that you have. But we also know that some of these mood changes are hardwired, not a technical term, Randy, but hardwired into the MS disease process in the immune system and the brain. And so some mood changes, like a significant depression perhaps, can even happen as a first symptom of MS. Somebody who's never had a history, and suddenly they have this episode of depression, and then suddenly other MS symptoms start to happen. So we know that mood changes, significant depression, anxiety can happen at any point in the disease course. And it's not about being weak, it's not about being a wimp, it's not about being crazy in the head. It's about a symptom that needs and deserves as much attention as your bladder or your walking or any other symptom of MS. These changes matter. That's why I do what I do. They affect every aspect of life. When we're depressed or very, very anxious, everything else feels worse. That's true with or without MS. But with MS, it makes that pain feel more painful. It makes the fatigue feel even more draining, right? It makes cognitive issues even more challenging than they already are. So the mood changes really need attention, not only to help them, but to help all these other symptoms that you're having. And of course, when we're very, very anxious or depressed, it affects how we communicate, how we perform at work, how we participate in important relationships in our lives, because we can be so turned in on ourselves that the people around us can kind of fade into the background. And that's tough on relationships, right? And we know, and I know very well, that support partners also experience significant mood changes. This is not just in MS, but in all chronic illnesses and significant illnesses. We need to pay as much attention to what's going on with the support partners as we do with the folks who are living with the disease itself. So let's talk first about grief and depression. When I first started talking about grief many, many, many years ago, when Randy and I were both young folk in MS, people looked at me and said, what are you talking about? Nobody's died. What are we grieving? But it was so important for people to understand that grief is a natural, normal, and healthy response to change and loss. So beginning with the first time a doctor says to you, you have multiple sclerosis, that is a loss. You've gained important information, but you've had to let go of that picture you had of yourself before and now incorporate this new information about yourself. And there's a grieving process that has to happen for you to move forward. And it's going to happen every time the disease takes something away that really matters to you, every single time. So how do you know whether you're grieving all the time or you're depressed? Great question, because depression, as I said, is very common. So here's one hint. Grief, as we know from other losses in our lives, ebbs and flows. We have this peak moment of intense pain, loss of a loved one, a beloved pet, a loss of an ability to do something we love doing. But over time, nature helps us heal, and the grief gradually begins to subside. With depression, it doesn't do that. Depression needs some help to manage. Okay, so if it's gone on for whole days and weeks at a time, you're feeling down, blue, sad, nothing is penetrating. If you've lost interest in things that used to give you joy or pleasure or stimulation, it's time to think, I need to talk to my healthcare provider to find out what's going on, okay? So if we go on to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about anxiety and irritability. And people usually laugh when I talk about irritability, but it's a really important component of mood changes in MS. Anxiety is equally common in MS, but it's gotten a lot less attention in the research and from mental health professionals because people said, well, it's got an S. Of course she's anxious, or of course he's anxious. But we know now that severe anxiety can be as disabling as depression. It can be as disabling as your physical symptoms of MS. It can really impact your daily life. So when anxiety is severe enough that all you do is worry and ruminate and you can't get past it, you have difficulty sleeping, concentrating, focusing, engaging with other people, you're tense and feel like a prickly pear all the time, overreactive, irritable, ready to lash out. These are things that need attention, and it's perfectly okay to say to your healthcare provider, you know, I'm a wreck, and I've been a real SOB to everybody around me for a while, and I need to understand why. Because this isn't me. It doesn't feel like me. And nobody likes me very much right now. What's going on? It's also important to know that irritability and moodiness can be signs of depression or anxiety. So some people don't, when they have depression, look the way we stereotypically think of a person who's depressed, in bed, under the covers, crying all the time. Sometimes they're just hyperreactive and irritable. And when I ask couples, anybody noticed any irritability lately? And people look at each other and nod and laugh. And sometimes you need to think about whether that's depression lurking in the background that could feel better, okay? And again, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, everything we talk about here, support partners feel too, all right? So if you're here with a support partner, make sure you connect with each other and say, you noticed any of these changes in yourself? And moving on.
So it's important then to realize, well, what do we do about this? I mean, every one of us is going to have a day where we feel irritable. My husband's not here, he's up working in the hotel room, but I'm sure that he would be jumping up and down and saying, huh, you got that right, because there are days where you're just not yourself. And that doesn't mean that you're suffering from this long-term anxiety, but when those things you start to put them together day after day after day, and the same thing with a low mood, right, where you just don't want to participate, all the things that Roz talked about. When we have days like that, we have days where we feel blue, maybe we didn't get good sleep, or maybe we saw something that sparked us to feel sad. But again, when it goes on for days, and there are questions that can be asked to understand if this is just something that's happening in isolation, or is it really a disorder that we really need to intervene with. So the most important thing that we can all do is screening. So your healthcare provider, whether it be your primary care provider or your neurology care provider, ought to be asking about your mood, right? And there's questions that you can ask. Just the same thing relative to the symptoms that Roz mentioned are the questions that can be asked about how you're participating in your life. Are you doing the things that always brought you joy, or are you not? Have you stopped taking your medication? Have you missed appointments? How is your relationship at home going? And these kinds of questions can get at mood. So then, what do we do about it once we've understood it? There's lots of different types of therapy. And of course, we all know there's lots of different types of medications. So the first thing to do, though, is what can you do to support your own mood, right? Without anybody's intervention, but what can help you? And you're going to hear these things coming up again and again. So physical activity, right? Your support system, the people around you that are your own emotional support people, right? These are folks that can help you. This supports your mood. Medication can be important, but I think before medication and how I practiced was I really wanted to have someone in some type of talk therapy, because medication will change how your mood, how you are feeling, how you're behaving. And sometimes if someone has been very depressed for a long period of time, coming out of that depression can be really frightening. And it can actually be dangerous for some people to experience that. So I really liked, before I would start on a medication, to have someone in therapy. I felt it was always safer, and I felt that they were then getting optimal care. And research has shown that when you combine therapy and medication, you tend to have the best outcomes. So, what's next? Managing mood issues, you need to acknowledge them. And none of us really like to do that. You know, a bad day, okay, we're able to say that. But when it starts to go on and on, you tend to avoid talking about it. And your support partner may notice it and either avoid talking about it, or the response that's given when it is brought up is such that they don't want to talk about it. And then very often, there's a very compressed time when you see a healthcare provider, it may not come up in the conversation. But if no one knows, no one can help. So it's very important to acknowledge them and then talk with your healthcare provider. There's a lot of times that a healthcare provider may pick up on mood disorder, but it's sure as heck going to be better if you can bring it up. And if you can allow your support partner to talk about their perception of what they're seeing. Because it may be completely different than your perception. But if you give that person permission, then your healthcare provider knows about it and can provide the best intervention and management strategies that you can talk about and then go forward with.
And I think we just want to emphasize, maybe counterintuitive again, but there is very strong evidence now that being physically active does improve mood. We know that that's true not just in MS, in the general population, just like we know that it improves cognition, which is why they're promoting so much physical activity in the aging population. Forget MS. We all need to stay active for our moods and for our cognitive function.
And I would say that can feel overwhelming to people who experience a lot of fatigue or have mobility issues. You want me to exercise? I can barely get through my day. So I think we're going to learn about that later in the program, of how we can maybe put together very short periods of mobility and physical activity. This isn't going to the gym and working out until you're exhausted. It has nothing to do with that. It's being active, it's moving to your ability, right? Everyone has something that might restrict what they're able to do. That's okay. It's finding what you can do and then being able to persist with that and do that regularly can make unbelievable differences.
I'd just like to comment and emphasize everything that everybody's been saying, but managing multiple sclerosis is about disease management, managing the course of the disease. It's about symptom management, managing the symptoms of the disease. And it's about person management, managing the person who has the disease as well. And an observation that I'd like to make is that times have changed, and the disease management part of MS has become emphasized a great deal in the neurologist's office. We have all of these wonderful disease management drugs, and they're very complicated, and they take a lot of time, and they take a lot of effort to use and work with. And most neurologists weren't benefited like I was to have a wonderful team of people around to associate with, to work with. And in the old days, before we had these disease management treatments, we talked about symptom management and person management, and you got a chance to talk about all of these issues that you're talking about right now. But in the office today, the MRI is emphasized, the white counts are emphasized, the disease management is emphasized, and these other things can slip through the cracks too easily. And so my piece of advice is that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. You need to bring these things up and squeak about them until they get managed and treated, because it's very easy for them to slip through. Now, in an MS center, like we have at the Consortium of MS Centers, just you have a variety, hopefully that kind of works its way through better, but it's not universal, and so.
Awesome. Great. So can you tell us about cognitive?
So cognitive problems have been left to me here for a moment here, and it's not the easiest topic to talk about. Before 1983, all of the books said that there were no cognitive problems in multiple sclerosis. I know it was 1983 because I was in a meeting in which we were discussing what research we should do, and the prospect of doing cognitive research came up. It was in Vancouver, British Columbia. There were 12 of us in the meeting, and we voted on whether we should do research on the topic that we knew was a problem, but we didn't talk about. Sort of like politics today. And so we voted, and it was 11-1 to study cognitive problems. I remember it like it was yesterday because I was the one who said I didn't think we should study them. Why didn't I think? Well, I didn't have any good treatments for anything, and I didn't want people to think that you got MS, and now you're going to have trouble walking, trouble seeing, and you're going to have trouble thinking as well. I didn't like. But I was wrong.
Troublemaker.
But I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong. And now, so we've studied it, and we understand that over half the people with MS have some problems with memory, planning, foresight, judgment, cognitive problems. We understand that, so then we can learn how to deal with it. The best way to deal with cognitive problems, in my experience, is to not get them. And the best way to not get them is to get on a disease management treatment early to keep it from happening. It's hard to get it back once we lose it. Another way that you can deal with cognitive problems that people don't really understand, but we actually saw it quite up front, was with exercise, if you will, using your brain to work. Your brain is not a muscle, but if you don't use it, you will lose it. And we started a program some 35 years ago for very disabled people with multiple sclerosis who were all in wheelchairs. And we brought them in to an achievement center. We called it for a day program for all kinds of activities. And we saw that those people actually got smarter. Why did they get smarter? Because they were talking. They stopped isolating themselves. They started going to movies again and started going to restaurants because other people were doing it and they were exercising their brain. So I think it's good to understand how the brain works. So I like to take a moment and explain how the brain works, to show you how it works so you can do something about it in terms of process. So if I asked you all, How do you drive from Denver to Vail? I used to live in the Vail area for a while, so that's the only route I know now. If I asked you how to do that, and you actually would have to know how to do it. So how do you know? You've looked at a map or you've driven it before, and right now when I'm asking you how to do it, you're seeing that map in your brain. You see with the back part of your brain. That's called the occipital lobe. You've retrieved that vision from just in front of that and moved it to the back part of the brain. Now you're seeing it, but you're not telling me how to get there. In order for you to tell me how to get there, you have to move that image to the back middle part of your brain, up in the temporal lobe, we call it. That's an area called Wernicke's area there, in which you formulate language. Now you're formulating how to get there, but you haven't told me. In order for you to tell me, you have to move that to the front part of the brain, to an area called Broca's area. And then you can, that's the motor speech area. You're ready to make it come out. But in order for it to come out, you have to move it to the top part of your brain, which moves your mouth and tongue and muscles, and then you tell me how to do it. And it happens just like that. Why? Because those tracks are so highly myelinated that it moves very rapidly. And what happens in MS? You get demyelination along those areas. And so it begins to short circuit. And you lose it, it drops out. So your information processing, retrieving that information, it's there. You just need to get it out. Sometimes you need some triggers. When you get old, I think it works that way too. I need a trigger sometimes to get the things out. But it's there, and so we have to do ways to get it out better. Our speech pathologists work on that. Neuropsychologists work on that.
We're going to go to the next slide and talk about how to manage them.
Right,
Because
I'm not gonna talk about
it's
that.
gone from my Broca area to my, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what we know specifically. These are all things you're probably familiar with now, but again, there are many different kinds of cognitive problems that can happen. So before we manage them, do you want
Well, as I was saying, as you're moving it forward, getting that information from one place to the brain to get it out, short circuits. It's harder to get it in because it's harder to implant those memory tracks. Our concentration and attention gets diverted, so we have to develop compensation for that. Sometimes we have to cheat, and we write things down, we make lists, and that's all good things to be able to plan, have memory, planning, foresight, and judgment. And word finding is always a problem for all of us. And so those are the changes that we have to deal with and work with.
Awesome. And information processing is at the top of the list because for many of the cognition researchers, they would say that that's really the hallmark of cognitive change in MS, that there is a slowing, as Randy was describing, of the ability to process this information. And when that processing is slowed, you may experience it as having more difficulty learning and remembering something, or you may experience it as having more difficulty attending and concentrating. But when they look with these tests, sometimes what's underlying all of that is just this slowing process from the demyelination. So let's look at how we can manage this, because we want to make sure we're leaving time for your questions. So as with mood, I'm just going to encourage you to ask for cognitive screening if you haven't gotten it. And the quickest way that it's currently screened in clinical practice is just a very quick test of that processing speed, because that gives a hint. If your processing speed is slowed, that may be a signal that more testing is required to find out exactly what's going on. But the current recommendation is screening at diagnosis, because cognitive changes are known to begin even before physical symptoms appear in many, many, many people. So we want to screen at diagnosis, and the reason is two main factors that drive people out of the workforce early are fatigue and cognitive changes. So if we can catch cognitive changes early, we can help people stay working as long as they want to and are able. So advocate for yourself if you're not getting screening. Personalized cognitive remediation, as Randy was referring to, we often suggest seeing either a psychologist or a speech-language pathologist who can look at exactly the kinds of challenges you're having at home and at work and work with you to tailor tools, strategies, compensatory tricks to help you manage whatever your particular difficulties are in the tasks that you have to do, okay? But also, again, these lifestyle interventions are so important for your cognition. Diet matters. What we eat affects how our minds work, how much physical activity we get. Are we managing stresses, or are stresses overwhelming us so that we can't think clearly? And, as Randy described, staying active mentally, socially, doing things that engage our minds. Those are the ways we're going to help slow cognitive processing difficulties in MS, okay?
I have one more comment, and that's that cognitive problems, as we talked about, are very common, but they're also very common without MS as well. And so when we have somebody who has a cognitive problem, we need to make the right diagnosis too. And obviously our neuropsych testing can help us with that. But, and I'm not telling Roz anything about this, but depression can play a major role in cognitive problems. And it's a very treatable thing that we see. Forget MS for a minute. If somebody comes in with Alzheimer's disease or somebody comes in with Pick's disease, diseases that you never heard of, we need to look for depression to get that managed, because we can manage those things. They may have an anemia, or they may have a physical problem. So we need to look for other things besides the MS and get those treated, whether it's thyroid, B12 deficiency, whatever it happens to be. Those things can't be ignored either.
And one important point, if you're a woman in the middle of life, you're perimenopausal, you're menopausal, or you're a man or a woman and you've been treated for cancer of some kind, or you've had COVID, you may have MS issues, you may have COVID issues, you may have chemo issues, you may have menopause issues. You're not going to know what's causing it, the cognitive changes. And the best neuropsych testing won't necessarily tease out what problem comes from what. So the issue is how to compensate and how to perform in the roles that matter to you using these strategies, and not spending your time worrying about, well, what's causing this? Is it because I'm a 50-year-old woman? Doesn't matter, right?
Ross, I'd like to just mention one other thing, because you mentioned that cognitive changes can begin early in the disease process. And in fact, it's actually been seen in people who might have to have an MRI for another reason. So they have migraine headaches, or they've been in a car accident, and they get an MRI, they've never had a symptom that would be related to their brain or their spinal cord. And lo and behold, they've got some spots that look an awful lot like MS. And in fact, based on what we know about MRI, it has a name to it. It's called radiologically isolated syndrome. It's kind of pre-MS in a way. But interestingly enough, those folks have been looked at for cognitive function, and their cognitive function is already different from people who don't have those changes in their brain. So you may say, well, I've had MS for 20 years or 30 years. Does that mean I'm that much further along? It varies with everybody, and some people do remarkably well cognitively forever, and some people have more trouble. And even if you're having trouble, it's not the end of the world either, because these interventions that have been mentioned, diet, lifestyle, these attending to mood, these are things that can actually help to change your cognitive function for the better. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that if you're 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road, that's not the end of the road at all, that these interventions are still highly effective.
So you're on a roll, Kathy. So can you talk about how can people talk about these invisible symptoms that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, well, I think the first line up there is the most important, right? They're called invisible for a reason. No one else can see them, but you sure as heck can feel them, right? And it's really hard to help people understand what you're experiencing. Because when you say, oh my God, I'm just so tired, I can't go to that function today. And your partner may say, well, you know, if you just exercised more, you'd probably be fine. That's not always going to fix it in the moment, right? There's going to be, and how many people know this? How many people have good days and bad days with their MS, right? And sometimes on a good day, what do? Too much. So then you have a bunch of bad days in a row, right? But nobody can read your mind. You're the only person that knows what's going on. So it's important to try and communicate what you're experiencing. And I can tell you, there's ways to do that that are effective and ways that probably aren't so effective. So ways that are not effective are saying, I've told you this a million times, I'm tired already, I have MS. You know, that's probably not going to make a difference for that other person. But to let them know that on good days, you are ready to go. And on days that aren't so good, you really need to take a break. And Roz has a great short video that's up on our Instagram, and it's kind of the red light, green light. And in the video, it's really cute because she's got a red thumb and a green thumb. But when you're having a bad day or a bad time and you can't participate because of a symptom that they can't see, red light. And when you're good to go, green light. So finding ways that you can communicate with the people important to you can help them understand what you're experiencing and help them better support you, right? You have to be able to describe it not only to the people who are in your social circle and your support circle, but to your healthcare provider. They can't read your mind either, right? And so thinking about, before an appointment, what you're experiencing, right? Because that's what we use as providers to help understand what's going on, so together we can create a management strategy that's going to be beneficial, right? So I think having that plan B, so you have plans to go out and you're going to do things in a certain way, and you know it's just not going to be a great weekend, and you know it. You know it when you wake up in the morning, you know the kind of day it's going to be. So having that plan B, or what are we going to do if it's not a good day? And making that decision ahead of the day. Right? So it's not 8 o'clock in the morning, you're leaving at 9, and now you're announcing, I can't do it, right? So it might be better a few days before, what are we going to do if this isn't a good day for me? So those kinds of planning, that kind of communicating, that red light, green light of giving people signals can be very, very helpful in your overall communication. And there's lots of literature out there that both you and your support partner can take a look at. The websites from all the advocacy organizations have terrific information that can help with this as well. Sometimes if someone's not interested in reading something, you can just kind of leave it out. And sometimes someone might pick it up. So I'll stop there because we're running out of time.
No, I see Stephanie.
No, I did too.
Slinking up here. So this is our signal to turn it over to you guys to ask your question.
First, thank you. Thank you all. That was a great panel. Good job.
Thanks.
I don't think my mic is on. All right, there we go. All right, so for those of you who are joining us virtually, there's a chat box. If you enter questions that you might have there, we have somebody here in person who will relay those up front to me. But let's start with those of you here in person. Any questions? Oh, not working, hold on. Julie, you're our test subject here.
Hello, hello.
Okay.
Perfect.
Hi. So my mom has FTD and she has cognitive issues, and I know we can't change the disease from progressing, but we can slow it with those medications. But those medications work in slowing cognitive issues in MS also. So like if I started now on a medication that's supposed to help slow cognitive decline.
So those medications are not specific for any one symptom. All these medications involve slowing the immune system down, basically. And so by slowing the disease process down, if you can slow the disease process down, you potentially could slow the speed of the progression of the cognition, but it's a crapshoot because they're not designed right for that particular
Is there
purpose.
anything designed for that for us early on that we can take to slow it?
We have to find out the inciting factors that are going on. If we can treat the depression, if we can treat the fatigue, if we can treat the other symptoms, the cognition will improve as well. We have no particular drug, despite what I see on television, for anybody who has cognitive problems, even though I see it on television all the time that their cognitive problems are better.
I would also
exercise.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You do the inciting things. You do you treat around it. That's not specific for cognitive problems.
And I think Julie was referring, you used the acronym FTD, and so some people might not know what that is, but frontotemporal dementia.
Can't hear.
And we have used dementia medications off-label in MS, but whether they work or not. There's research going on right now into medications, into different therapies, and some as well.
I'm not quite hearing you. Could you?
So she was asking, her mom has frontotemporal dementia.
Well, frontotemporal dementia is a totally different disease process. and
She knows that. She's asking if the same medications would help.
I'm sorry, I
dementia
didn't
help
quite get
MS.
that. Yeah, no, I'd like to tell you that for frontotemporal dementia, there's a medicine that'll work. It's not there yet.
But for her,
You get on treatment earlier.
I can't,
Sorry. So like when you're diagnosed with MS, the sooner you get on a treatment, the better the outcome is supposed to be. So I'm wondering if with cognitive issues, if I got on a treatment now, if that would slow it for deaths.
not with frontotemporal dementia you're not talking about. You're talking about MS
With
now.
MS, yes. I was just saying, because I
So
know
the
there's
answer
drugs
that I
that
had
slow
is
it with that.
the answer that I had.
okay, so I think what's important about this, unfortunately, when the first disease-modifying therapies were in clinical trials, they were not looking at cognitive symptoms. It was a big miss, but they just weren't including that in their outcome measures. So it was a long time before we knew whether the disease-modifying therapies would make a difference. I think there is now good evidence, but Kathy and everybody up here can contradict me if I'm wrong, but we have very good evidence that getting on a disease-modifying therapy as soon as possible slows the disease process, which means it also helps to slow progression of cognitive symptoms that happen in MS. We cannot reverse them, but we can definitely slow them, and the DMTs so far are your absolute best strategy for doing that.
So I would just like to address it in a little different way. So I think sometimes we think about using some of those medications that are used for different types of dementia. Would they be beneficial in someone with MS who's experiencing early cognitive changes? And I think many of us have tried to use them, and I think it's with mixed success. Sometimes medications for mental alertness have some benefit for people, and not necessarily for every one of the issues that we mentioned as occurring with cognitive changes in MS. But sometimes people, it's much more difficult to learn and be a part of a conversation if you're not able to be alert. So some of those medications have been used, and that can help with that. But I think the best strategies for preventing worsening of cognitive function or any of the issues that we experience, but those in particular would really be our physical activity and our diet. And I say that because there's actually evidence in diets such as the Mediterranean diet, which is probably the best studied diet out there. So it has benefits in many areas, but cognitive changes in MS are one of them. And so adhering to that type of healthy eating can really be mind-altering, if you will. So it could really help cognitive function along with physical activity. So those two things are probably your best bet in forestalling or keeping things where they are, or maybe for some, even improving it a little bit. And the other medications, I would say that we don't know very much about how they might be helpful for people with MS.
Wonderful. We have a virtual question.
Yeah, so one of our virtual participants has asked, any developments in repairing damage to myelin?
Couldn't hear.
Well, it's a hot topic, obviously, to repair myelin. To be honest with you, I don't see anything in the near future that's going to repair myelin except we keep emphasizing this, slowing the process of the disease. There's a natural reparative process that goes on in our bodies. It's not very good at repairing myelin, but it does repair some. What we have to prevent is axonal loss. By that I mean the nerve is called the axon. The myelin is the insulation of the nerve that allows the electricity to move very, very rapidly. MS is a disease that attacks the myelin, but as the myelin degenerates, that axon degenerates as well. And when that's done, it's done. So short of developing some process like, in the future, potentially real stem cell therapy of some sort that could regenerate the nervous system, if you will, we have no way to replace that except the natural process that goes on. And that's very slow and unpredictable.
Fortunately, there's a lot of research going on.
Lots of research
at the
going on.
moment. But I think everyone in the research arena, as well as everybody in this room, would like to know how to regenerate these damaged areas. And so certainly stem cells just seem to make logical sense, right? So can't you just give me some of those stem cells and they'll just go in there and they'll find the areas that are damaged and fix them. And that would be great. But making that happen is the challenge, right? And how to use those stem cells. And so it's not as though people think it's impossible and let's just not think about that. There's a lot of research looking at that. There's also cells that there's cells that make myelin, and there's cells that come before that. And they're precursor cells, right? So they're the ones that will develop into myelin-making cells. And there is a lot of research going on how we can stimulate those cells to become myelin-making cells, and so that they can actually then form more myelinated areas. And again, this is in the research arena, but these are the kinds of things that we're looking at. We're just not ready for them at the moment, which is frustrating, right? Because we need them now. And I think researchers feel similarly.
It scares me when we mention the word stem cells, and I was the first to mention it, because when we say stem cells, there are stem cells and then there are stem cells. And in today's world, there are so many phony treatments out there where they're pasting stem cells on your skin and they're having you swallow stem cells or whatever they're calling them stem cells. And I'll just be honest, it's all bogus, absolutely bogus. And so we're not there yet. Just beware of that. You can't run out.
If anyone has questions, raise your hand so that the people with the mics can get to you. And I'm just going to add one more thought, which is the brain and the nervous system, it's a magnificent organ. How many of you, when you're sick or stressed or overheated, see old symptoms bubbling up to the surface? So that means you have what's called neurological reserve. Your brain has created pathways around those damaged areas. And so in neurology, we say preserve the reserve, preserve the reserve. And this goes back to wellness, taking care of your body, exercising, keeping your mind active, eating right. All of those things will preserve that reserve.
Well said.
I believe we had a question.
Oh, Krista's over there with the mic, Steph.
Actually, I just have it's kind of a generalized question, but more maybe of a comment. Throughout your presentation, you have always said to communicate with your care provider and with your community and folks that are going to help you decide if that symptom is depression or anxiety or whatever it is. Do you have any thoughts about whether or not it's beneficial if you're going to have a real communication with your care provider? Because you have symptoms today, but you're not going to see your care provider for 3 months down the road, how important is it to journal or to keep track of what your symptoms are so that you can compare, like, today I overworked and then I felt like this, and tomorrow I ate pizza and I felt like that, and this hurt or that hurt, yada, 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 so that when you finally can go to your care provider, is that going to give them a much broader picture of?
So
I'd like to take that first because everybody's going to attack me after what I say, because nobody likes what I'm going to say. They're getting ready with the bow and arrow. I hated it when people journaled for me. I absolutely hated it because that's what they were thinking about all the time. And all of a sudden, they're thinking about, oh, do I have a little pain here, or do I have this there? And they're writing it down, and they're reviewing it, and pretty soon that little symptom got to be a bigger symptom when it couldn't. So what I wanted to do, and I know I'm an antique, is I wanted you to call me right when you had the symptom and talk to my staff and see, not wait 3 months like medicine is today. Don't get me started on that. But I know that nurses love journals. My nurses didn't, but most nurses love journals.
wait a second.
I knew it.
You're going to get attacked.
As the nurse,
I knew I'd be attacked.
Everybody,
I
we
have
love
to jump
Randy.
in.
I told you I was going to be attacked.
no, it's a yes, but.
It's
a yes, but.
I think it's important for you to track your symptoms.
Exactly.
Particularly if you have memory issues or if you have a lot of change from time to, it will help you recognize what seems to trigger your fatigue or your pain or your mood issues. If you look at a diary or a calendar, that will help you identify patterns. Once you've identified the patterns, you can take a short note, not a diary, to Randy and say, I've noticed that. This is when I get fatigued. This is when pain is triggered. This is when my mood tanks. But it's for you
Yeah, that's a little different than,
to
I would
learn.
take that one step further, Roz, and I totally agree with you. But we all know we never have enough time in an office visit to say really what's on our mind, right? So when you journal or you're writing down a symptom, you can write it on a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be something formal. And your visit is upcoming and you take a look at that. There might be a lot of symptoms on there, right? I mean, come on, everyone can have a lot of symptoms. But you're able to say, after you look at it, well, what are the top two? What are the top two things that are really tripping me up every day, literally or figuratively? And bring them up. Because if you bring 10, there's simply not enough time to give them all the attention that they need. And that's not trying to be unfair. That's trying to get the most important symptoms that are really bothering you addressed well, right? So then we can create something for that.
in my defense,
I'm going to move on.
journaling is different from what I'm hearing Kathy say.
Randy.
I want you to bring a note with your symptoms listed. That's the best way so you don't think
Go
of,
to the next question.
don't forget
Right
something.
here.
But that's different from journaling.
Right here.
All right.
Oh, let's continue on communicating with physicians, shall we? We're going to take this one step further. Many times during your presentation, I heard you say, you have to tell this to your physician. You have to communicate this. You have to communicate that. You got to advocate for yourself.
Yes.
Where do I begin? We need you all to be advocates for us as well. Advocating for oneself is a lot harder than it sounds, a lot harder than it looks on paper, right? I had a condition that went undiagnosed for 13 months because physicians weren't listening to me. Unlike you all, of course, there are a lot of physicians and healthcare providers in our country who seem not to have learned basic communication skills.
Yes.
The first one being listen to your patients. I have been a care partner for many years. I now consider myself a patient with a chronic condition. As a care partner, the first thing I learned, nobody was listening to me.
Very true.
When I was caring for my parents with dementia. Nobody listened to me because I was the crazy daughter, right? I didn't have valuable information that my parents' healthcare team needed. My point here being, this is a two-way street. This is a partnership. Anybody with MS, any other chronic condition in this country, we need healthcare providers also advocating for us. This is a partnership.
So let me just respond from a communication psych perspective. I totally agree with you. I mean, there's nothing you've said that I don't agree with. And I think part of the challenge is finding that provider, and it's like dating, right? You may need to meet a few lemons before you meet somebody with whom you can communicate, and depending on where you live, that can be
And your insurance.
And your insurance.
And your insurance. I mean, there are so many things that can get in the way. But it still has to start with you identifying your priorities and communicating them. And if you feel that you are not being heard, you can say, I don't think you're listening to what I have to say, or I don't think you recognize that I have valuable information that can help you treat my parents, or you're focusing on your priorities, not mine. A good provider should be able to hear that message from you and respond. And if that person is too arrogant or too insecure or too incompetent to be able to do that, you need to find another provider.
Amen.
And you may
Amen.
But I will just say, in defense of everyone in this room, that's not always an easy solution either. Let me finish.
Of course.
So I think there's a lot going on that requires systemic change, right? One of the things that we talk about in the healthcare professional arena is this concept of patient-centered care. And out of that came this other concept called shared decision-making, right? We all get what it means, but actually practicing shared decision-making where, as a provider, I'm actually asking questions of you that get at what you're trying to tell me is not an easy fix with healthcare professionals. Some have it, I think they have it innately. Some can learn it, and others are never going to get there. Yep. But I will say that there's a lot going on to try and help healthcare providers be better at that. Because what you say is absolutely true. You have a lot to say, and no one's listening to you. I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard that over the years. To say, I've been saying it, and nobody wants to hear me. So now you suffer all that time with whatever it is. So I agree with Roz that trying to find the best words to be your own best advocate is still important. Without a doubt, it is important. But we're trying to come at it from that other side in educating healthcare professionals to listen.
And I'm not going to get defensive except to say I agree with everything you said.
Randy, 1 second.
I have a quick question, but I will say regarding this whole big topic, one of the best pieces of advice I got in the beginning when I attended an MS 101 from the Rocky Mountain MS Center over there, they do it online now too, so I'll put a plug for them, is that your doctors work for you, you don't work for your doctors. So I don't go into any doctor's visit without a printed question list of my top 3 questions, and I drive my own appointments. So if you don't do that, I wouldn't step foot into another appointment without that list if I were you. That's just me, because
Squeaky wheel gets
I'm
the
paying
oil.
them.
Yep.
My quick question is, when you guys were talking, I think Roz, this was your slide about the cognitive changes and the ongoing screening every 6 to 12 months. Is that something that you're supposed to be asking your neurologist for, your psychologist, your primary? What kind of screening are you talking about, please?
So a great question, and I think that is the ideal, the recommendation from the experts in the field that screening happens. It is not happening everywhere, and so I would start by asking your MS provider about it and ask if they can either do that screening with you or refer you to someone who can do it. You can also contact the National MS Society and ask them for a referral near you of somebody who can do cognitive screening with you. I think it's a situation of you get it where you can get it.
So welcome back to the More About MS program. We're going to move on to our next session, which is called Make Use of a Moment. So even the smallest moments of your day can go a long way for your wellness, whether it's just a quick exercise, a simple tip to help you manage your relationships, or a small change that helps you conserve your energy. There are a lot of ways to start living better right now. So we're going to have Mandy Rohrig, Roz Kalb, and Stephanie Nolan here to show you how to do just that. And we're going to get started by just playing a quick video.
Have you ever wondered how you can fit in the recommended 150 minutes of physical activity per week? You can do this by finding those little moments that you have throughout your day. Maybe it's waiting for your food to heat up in the microwave and you do exercises while you wait. Or perhaps it's between commercials on television. You decide to do some couch aerobics. Attaching your exercises to different activities that you do during the day allows you the opportunity to make the most of every moment. And here are some examples of some more ways you can make use of your moments. Often it's hard to find the time or energy to get in some cardiovascular exercise, so consider some couch cardio. The benefits of cardiovascular exercise from your couch are those little bursts can help your mood, they can help your energy, and they can certainly help your overall fitness level. So some of the moves you can do would be moving those arms in place, reaching those arms up over your head, and reaching across your body. Repeat the sequence as you're able. Even in your vehicle, you can complete exercise snacks. If you are driving while your vehicle is stopped, you can do an exercise for the tricep muscle, the muscle on the back of your upper arm. By positioning your hands at 10 and 2,
You can push into your steering wheel, activating that muscle on the back of the upper arm. Very helpful for getting in and out of chairs.
Do you ever find yourself hurt by something that someone says to you, but you have no idea how to respond or how to deal with it in the moment? Or perhaps you're struggling to convey what those invisible symptoms of yours feel like so that others will understand what's going on with you. If so, here are a few tips that you can use in the moment. I have a question for you. So how do you respond when someone hurts you or upsets you, wounds you in some way? Do you withdraw? Do you shut down? Do you feel so hurt that it makes you feel helpless to respond? So I have a suggestion. When you're having trouble figuring out what to do, just say ouch. Saying ouch is a word everybody understands. It gives you a chance to feel better, express this feeling of pain, and it gives the person you're talking to a chance to rethink what's just been said, maybe apologize, maybe start a different direction. The most important thing is that it can help keep the communication going. Because when you shut down, the hurt just sits inside and you don't get anywhere. Have you ever had days when you were just so tired that you couldn't even begin to describe it to other people? Well, it's important that you can describe it because fatigue, which is one of the most common symptoms of MS, is invisible to everybody else and they just don't get it. So I'm going to teach you the red light, green light trick to help you convey this to other people. So when you're feeling really good, you can show them a green light. You're ready to roll. When you're starting to feel like your energy is sapping, you can show them a yellow light. And when you're just done, no energy left, you can give them the red light. And that will help them not have to guess how much energy you have left to use.
We all know time is a precious commodity. Do you ever wish that you could make small changes that save you crucial time and energy? Well, here are just a few of the many ways that you can use OT tools and strategies to gain some of those precious moments back. You can start your day with this quick tip to save energy and make the most of your day. Most people don't realize that they've been trying to stand and put their pants on since they were little kids, but sitting down can actually save you so much energy. So just sit down to put on your pants and underpants, shoes and socks, or even when you're doing your shirts and your buttons, because it just saves a little bit of energy if you're not trying to balance while you're doing those activities, and then you can use that energy for something way more fun later in the day. A tip to help you be more independent in the kitchen while saving you time and energy. Instead of going back and forth with your supplies to maybe work at a table to cut produce or prep the chicken, you can use a rolling cart on one side of the room, fill all of your supplies on there, especially those heavy ones, and then roll them to the other side of the kitchen where you might be working. A lot of energy can be wasted going back and forth to go get the salt that you forgot or to get one of those heavy appliances to carry around. So just putting it on a cart and moving it around can save you a ton of time and energy.
So now we want to practice with you, and we're going to talk about ways you can use the moment in every room of your house throughout the day. So we're going to start in the bedroom, and I just have a couple of tips for you. One is, do a little body check in the morning. How are you feeling today? Is your body working? What do you need to share with your support partner if you are there together? What does that person need to know about how you're feeling? You also want to check with your support partner. How are you doing today? Is this a good day for you or not? And let's remember that although closeness and intimacy can happen in any room of the house, if there are issues in the bedroom that you wish were resolved or better to help you with your intimacy, this is another thing to bring up with your healthcare team.
The bedroom is also a nice opportunity to do a little bit of stretching to get you moving first thing in the morning. Often that laying down position, you don't return to that position until much later in the day or even perhaps at nighttime. So taking advantage and seizing this moment to do some stretches can be very helpful. So big, deep breathing just to wake up your body. It can be really, really helpful. As you're laying down, pulling one knee up to your chest to begin to loosen up your back and loosen up your legs. And for those of you that have spasticity or tightness, bending those knees, putting those feet flat on the bed, and then rocking your knees slowly side to side can stretch out that lower back, start stretching out those hips, and you'll feel a little more comfortable, hopefully, when you start taking those steps or transitioning to the rest of your day. Lots of opportunities in the bedroom, not just for Roz's activities, but others too.
Let's move on to the bathroom.
So in the bathroom, there are also a ton of opportunities to just conserve a little bit of that energy. And as an OT, that energy conservation is top of my list to talk with people. We spend a lot of energy balancing in the bathroom, and often I hear people say, I don't want to get a shower chair. I don't need it. I'm not ready for it. I'm not that bad yet. But using a shower chair to sit and take a shower can save you so much energy, because we get hot in the shower. You might close your eyes when you rinse and you lose balance. So when you lose that balance, you're using that energy to balance some more. So if you can use a shower chair or a bench in the shower, that's gonna save you some energy for maybe after you get out and then have to get dressed. And we talked about sitting down when you get dressed. Put on a robe and get to a comfortable spot and then get dressed. That way you are not trying to get dressed in a wet, damp environment. Or also sitting down when you're brushing your teeth is another great way to save some energy. We don't need to stand to brush our teeth. Sit down and do it. You could focus on that coordination with your hand and less work on your legs.
And you do want to be safe. You want to conserve energy when you're in the bathroom, but as long as you're safe and you're able to do a little bit more, it is in fact another opportunity for exercise. Anytime that you can take a daily task that you know you have to do, that's just part of your day, washing your hands, going to the bathroom, brushing your teeth, etc., you can tack on an exercise to go with that. So for example, maybe after you're done using the restroom and you have cleaned up yourself, you can work on some shoulder blade squeezes while you're sitting on the toilet. Just a few squeezes to remind yourself to work on that posture. Once that's done, get up, wash your hands, get on your way. Something very simple, but something that can be done, and it contributes to your overall health and mobility. Also, another option, after you wash those hands, you check your hair, you can do a little calf stretch. Standing, leaning against that sink, as long as you're safe and you know it's not slick, and the surface is all comfortable for you. Extend one leg behind you. Heel down, knee straight, leaning into that counter a little bit, feeling that nice pull through that calf muscle. Something that you can do. If you do that every time after you use the restroom, 6, 8 times a day, maybe more, think of how many opportunities that is for that calf muscle that may be tight when you're walking, for you to be able to give that a little TLC and hopefully make some improvements.
And I forgot to mention, another thing is some people who are catheterizing have a little trouble getting onto the toilet maybe. We found that transferring forward onto a toilet could be a great way to save some energy. There's a lot of less turning around, and you can go straight from a wheelchair forward onto a toilet.
Let's move into the kitchen.
Well, but don't forget about slippery bath mats. So if you're choosing to exercise or when you're transferring, make sure that whatever's on the surface of the bathroom floor won't move or slip when you're doing those calf stretches.
Definitely, definitely.
All right, so now we're in the kitchen. What can we do to save some energy in the kitchen? I often tell people, if you can and if it's possible, purchase frozen vegetables that are already chopped and prepped for you. Just save the energy chopping and prepping. You can use so many different gadgets. Slow cookers are great because then your kitchen doesn't get so hot, and you can leave the food and it cooks for you. Like, how great is that? You don't have to do the work. You don't have to sit over a hot stove and get fatigued there. And again, sit down. Using a seated surface while you're chopping or prepping anything you couldn't buy frozen is going to save you a lot of that energy. Use timers to keep track of what you're doing also, so that you don't forget something on the stove and burn it, because then you have to cook it again. And who wants to cook twice? I don't even want to cook once.
Ditto that. So the kitchen is also an opportunity while those timers are running to do a little bit of exercise. specifically standing exercises. So you have typically a stretch of countertop where you can use that countertop safely for balance, and you can do a lot of glute and buttock muscle strengthening. So if you're someone when you're walking that you find a little stability or instability in your hips, maybe it juts out to the side when you take a step, or you feel a little wobbly when you take steps, some counter exercises can be really helpful. So using the counter for balance, working on sidestepping, very helpful. If sidestepping is not something that works well for you, some standing hip exercises, again, using that for balance and safety as you need. And then the good old-fashioned, I call it old-fashioned because it's been around forever and it's a good exercise, squats. You do this can really be helpful. Do 30 seconds while your coffee is heating up in the microwave. You can get a good 10 to 15 repetitions in that small period of time. Lots of opportunities in the kitchen for exercise. What about the living room, Roz?
So remember I said that closeness, connection, intimacy can happen in any room of the house, maybe not the way it was when you were 18, 20 years old, but it can still happen in any room of the house. So take those moments when you're sitting together, watching TV, reading, just enjoying time to connect, to talk, to ask how the day was, maybe to hold hands, maybe to just sit close and feel that connection. It's important to maintain those moments of connection, no matter what age we are, no matter what the disability situation is, how able or not able you feel. Take those moments and use them. They are precious to helping you stay connected with one another. So do you feel like you've got moments to use in every room of the house? Questions about that? Comments about that?
I'm just going to add, Roz, that while it might seem that these little moments maybe are insignificant or may not matter to the full physical activity that you're trying to aim for, you're working towards for the day, but in fact it does matter. Those little moments count, they add up, they count towards your physical activity goals, and they really can make a difference over time. So seize those moments.
Absolutely, and I think like we said earlier, you want to be able to do something fun. In the video I said, who wants to spend their time putting on their socks? That's pretty boring. Nobody wants to sit around and put their socks on all day, but maybe you saved a little energy using a gadget, and now you can enjoy time with your children or your grandchildren an extra 10 minutes at their soccer game. So finding those ways to save those minutes can give you those minutes to spend somewhere else.
Thank you. So I know, let me see if I can get my microphone back on. Perfect. I know for me, living with MS, my cue that I need to do something to change is when I start dreading something. For me, one of the things I started to dread was taking a shower because it's hot and it's exhausting, and by the time I get out of the shower and dry my hair, I am more fatigued and sweaty again. So like, really, what's the point? Do you have any tips for me and this gentleman over here?
I do. So making sure your cooler temperatures in the shower is one thing. Using a seated surface, if possible, is another thing. Also, I tell people, when you're thinking of how to manage the energy you have, if you do all the tough things back to back, shower, do your hair, get dressed, I'm done for the day, I look great, and I'm gonna lay in bed now. So how do you not do that? So when you get out of the shower, if you feel that fatigue, do a little check and say, I'm feeling 0 to 10, where's my fatigue right now? I feel 7, I need a break. Get a nice robe, a comfy robe, and you know what? You say, I'm done with the work right now. I'm gonna sit and have breakfast and my coffee and read the newspaper, and when I've rested, I'm gonna get dressed. Because I need to balance that high to a low activity to a high activity to a low activity. And by giving you these little tips, we're saving some of that energy throughout the day. When you're tired at a 7, is it easier or harder to blow dry your hair?
Way harder.
So now that hair drying task is way more energy consuming. But if you get yourself back down to a 2 and then blow dry your hair, it's a lot easier. So thinking of where your fatigue is when you do those activities.
You know, something you just said, Stephanie, really struck me about, you know, checking in with yourself about what your fatigue level is, how you're feeling. But I think that checking in with yourself is important for all these things we're talking about. How's my mood feeling right now? What do I need to do in the moment to feel better? Am I feeling disconnected from my partner? What's going on? Do I need to check in, connect, reach out and touch? How are my muscles feeling? Am I feeling tight? Am I feeling tired or weak? Those check-ins that you do with yourself are your cues on what you need to do in the moment to feel better, to take care of yourself. So we hope we've just given you some tips, things you can grab on in the moment to address some of those feelings that you might have.
Circling back to the journaling debate we had up here earlier, that might be something, if you keep a journal and you note you're fatigued and you take inventory of, well, maybe I need to break my shower and my hair drying into 2 separate sessions. Those are the things that when you're giving yourself that feedback, you can start to manage your symptoms more effectively through lifestyle. And then when lifestyle alone isn't enough, then you can go to medications and other management strategies with your healthcare team. But I think we had a question over here, or somebody raise your hand. I lost the hand that went up earlier, but there's a question over here.
Comes Morgan.
Sorry.
Primary progressive MS, and we have learned heat over 80 degrees is a trigger for her, which causes the muscles to seize up, become fatigued, tired, and can't do anything. So in the mornings, we have learned cool the water down, and we have worked our way up to cooling it down to pure cold for 30 seconds. Your muscles are awake, they are not stiff, they're not sore, and you feel your synapses firing, coming, and you're more awake, you're more feeling alive, and you're ready to go do something after that 30-second shower. But working your way up to it is the goal. And so it has helped her, let alone it helped me, overcome a lot of things. But that's why I'm just mentioning, putting that out there if that would help anybody.
That's great. Thank you. That's great advice. Absolutely.
The other thing that we have learned, or I have learned, is I have to do things in increments. I cannot do everything all at once. For example, we don't have a dishwasher, so we wash dishes at the sink. And if I do my dishes, sometimes I just wash them and leave them in the sink, and then I go and sit for 5 minutes, and then I come back and I rinse them and put them in the dish drainer. It's all about increments, and I know that one of the suggestions was in the kitchen, like to have a little cart to take things from point A to point B. Well, what I do is if I'm going to make yogurt today, or I'm going to make bread today, or I'm going to do something, I lay out all my ingredients, you know, and I make as few trips to the pantry as possible, and then I sit down for a while, and then I come back, and then I start the process, and then I go sit down. So increments, and that was really hard for me to learn because I'm not that person. So we have to really adjust and say, what can I do, and how long can I stand up, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's
great.
These comments also remind me that cooling devices, we haven't spoken at great length about those yet, can be helpful in any of these rooms and throughout your day, especially as we're approaching, you know, the summertime. Pre-cooling before you go out in that nasty heat can often be helpful to allow you to tolerate that slightly better.
Absolutely.
Any other comments?
I think even, we didn't include it here, but in the car is a place that I feel people get very fatigued. It gets so hot in the car. You know, modern technology is great. If you can pre-start your car and turn on that air conditioner before you get in, that's gonna help. If you're old school like me, and I just put in one of those sun visors to make sure the temperature of my car doesn't blast up so high. If you have a support partner who can go out and open the windows and turn on the car for you ahead of time, that's a great way to do it. So especially, I think most of the people here are from Colorado. I'm from Colorado. We have the most brutal sun here, and your car is like 8 million degrees when you get in. So those little tips can help save you that energy when you have to drive and focus and move your arms and turn your eyes and all that.
Automatic start.
Automatic
Right.
start,
Yeah.
just for the winter. That's right. That's
Yes.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
Or tips that any of you have also that you could share with the group. Yeah, so anticipating, well, it's not even anticipating, it's just lowering your body temperature to a lower level, even when you're not feeling fatigued, even when you're not feeling overheated, so that it gives you a greater buffer before you hit that threshold of feeling like you're melting and that you're overheated. Does that make sense? So if your threshold's here, but we pre-cool and we lower your body temp down to here, that gives us more wiggle room than if we stay here and we only can go to here. Yeah.
So like, that on? Okay. So, oh, yeah, it is. Sorry. So I guess my question is, like I'm heat intolerant. I'm probably the only person in this room who's comfortable, and I have a dress on with no scarf and pants and jacket, and I'm not sitting here shivering. So you're saying like before I go out in the summer, I would literally like wear my cooling vest, even around my house before I go out.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, because
just a few degrees helps a lot.
okay, because I'll be honest, I kind of stopped using it last summer because it just was so much work, and by the time I got all the ice packs in, I felt like my body had melted them, and it didn't do any good. So I will try this pre-cooling idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Never thought of that.
And it doesn't just, sorry. It doesn't just have to be a cooling vest. You can cool yourself so many other ways. It could be taking a cold shower. It could be having an ice cold drink can bring your core temperature down. I love frozen grapes are like an easy snack and it drops your temperature. Frozen cherries.
Ice in your wine. Ding, ding, ding.
There you go. Frozen cherries and just open a can of coconut cream and pour it on top. Like delicious and healthy. So there's different ways to cool you. You don't just have to wear a vest. It is hard to manage vests sometimes. Shop around, look at the different ones, find one that works for you. Maybe a neck cooler is better for you. There's all different cooling devices. I know we have a vendor here and they've got plenty of things to share for you to look at too, so you can get ideas.
And cooling towels are great. They're less bulky and easier to, so if I'm traveling, I'm usually not taking a vest, but I'll take a towel. They also make these sleeves that you wet them a little bit, and it feels like air conditioning. So the most efficient way of cooling your body is through evaporation. So for instance, I went on a hike on Monday, and man, the sun, you're right, is absolutely brutal here in Colorado. Even if it's not super hot, I was feeling it. So I just went to the bathroom and I splashed water on my arms and I just went out into the air and it's like instant air conditioning.
Okay, thank you for all those ideas. That's really helpful.
Let's take one more comment and then we're going to move into our next activity.
One thing that, Ron, no? Hello, hello? Okay. One thing that I've done, and I would hope that other people would think it would be helpful, I spend a minimal amount of time out in the sun in the summertime because I just can't take the heat. But when I do go out, I always wear one of his old cotton white shirts, you know, a dress shirt, and I use that. I use the white shirt simply because it's reflecting the sun. And so and it's cotton, and so it breathes a little better. And that way, if I'm outside, you know, always wear something white or light colored. Otherwise, if you start absorbing heat in a dark shirt, you're going to feel miserable. So light colors or white is always helpful for me.
And the wicking materials are really helpful now too. They have a lot of wicking, different types of shirts and pants and all the way to the underwear.
And then we can caveat off of that is our days start at 0500 just so that we can go outside and work while it's cooler and be inside by 10 o'clock for her, and then I can go back and work outside if I have to.
Right.
Absolutely.
She's contributing to the ranch. And then
Right. If you couldn't hear that, he was saying they get out earlier before the sun is brutal and do the things they need to outside then. That way they can go inside once it's Colorado sun.
Colorado sun. Awesome. Well, at this time, I want to thank our virtual attendees for joining us. Please fill out the survey that you can find on your dashboard. For those of you who are here in person, your surveys are in your folder, and we want everybody to fill that out before they leave today. That helps us make our programs even better for the next time.